Hello everyone. Welcome to Coffee, Love, and Books. My name is Michelle, and today I'm going to start, I guess a series you could call it, of videos about deep dives into moments, characters, just small minute details in literature. And this is just basically because I really enjoy classic literature, but especially because of those moments that you can identify. That's a thesis that's just a big point, and it relates so much to our real lives. So today I'm going to be talking about Sense and Sensibility. This will be spoilers for Sense and Sensibility, and I'm really excited to talk about it. I'm definitely not going to get to everything I want to because there's a lot, there's just so much. But I definitely want to do that deep dive analysis into it. And if you have read Sense and Sensibility, you'll probably appreciate this. But if not, and you don't care about being spoiled for it, you might just enjoy the ways literature connects to an author's thesis on real life and real emotions and struggles that people have. So, without further ado, let's jump in to one of my favorite scenes in all of literature. Chapter 44 of Sense and Sensibility. So just a reinforcement warning, this is spoilers for chapter 44, or through chapter 44 of Sense and Sensibility. I'll probably go to, explain other key points of the story, but that's basically, it's towards the end of the story, and here's the context. So, at this point in the story, Marianne has she has made it mostly through her great illness from being out in the rain and her sorrow and passion and her amazing Marianne-ness. She is absolutely crushed over Willoughby, and Eleanor, like the beautiful, amazing angel she is tending to her, never leaving her side, just holding everything together. Their mother isn't there. Colonel Brandon has gone to fetch her. So an interesting point about this story is that Eleanor is dealing with her own heartbreak over Edward, and you can definitely see the duality in Eleanor and Marianne's stories at this point. They both were somewhat led on by a man that they love, or did love and are still in love with. They are both heartbroken at this point in the story, and their love interests even have a couple of things in common, but mostly Edward is the greater version of Willoughby and the one who will do what's right even if it is inconvenient for him or it doesn't give him the life he wants, and Willoughby will do whatever he can to be rich. And that's definitely a theme you see throughout as far as the two girls' stories and the men they choose. That's the point we're at, and that's where our scene begins. Willoughby shows up at the house. Marianne has just gotten through the worst parts of her sickness. She's not there, and Eleanor hears that there's a gentleman downstairs. She comes down, and there's Willoughby, and she immediately tries to leave the room. She, like the beautiful Eleanor she is, avoids confrontation, and even if it's the guy who totally broke her sister's heart, she will not be angry with him if she can avoid it. She will avoid confrontation. That is one of her biggest flaws in this story, is that she will not go get what she wants because she doesn't want to hurt people, because she doesn't want to assume. She will sit back quietly and let things happen. But you really see in this scene how even if she won't fight for herself, she will fight for her sister, and I think that's a beautiful character development on the part of Eleanor. The reason the BBC, I think it was the mini-series, kind of botched this scene, maybe not notably, they still have most of the key points of the conversation, all the information is given, but Eleanor's reaction is different and her emotions are different, and I think that takes away from Eleanor's character because her capacity for empathy and forgiveness are beautiful, and her maturity in not excusing the evils done by Willoughby are absolutely inspiring, and it takes away from her character to have her leave in a huff or perform the way most people would. There's nothing wrong with just leaving the room when someone like Willoughby walks in, but her capacity for empathy and forgiveness are what make her a great and amazing and admirable character. So, okay, sorry, I got a little bit ahead of myself. So when Willoughby walks in, we see that she's angry and she's upset and she will not deal with this right now. She needs to be with Marianne. She doesn't have the time to sit around and listen to him. But her curiosity and her sense of honor, I love that use of the word. That is what Eleanor is. She is honorable. She is duty bound. And those are usually, I know we often see a feminine version of this, but I feel like those specific words are often used to refer to a lot of men in society when this was written. And I love how Austen attributes them to Eleanor, her honor, her duty, her bravery, and I love that. I absolutely love that small detail. So her curiosity over Willoughby causes her to sit down with him, despite her probably better judgment, but she sits down and she's willing to hear him out, which I think is the first step in her forgiveness. And I love this scene. And I think a lovely thing that Austen does to kind of attribute humanity to Willoughby for the audience is to cause him to be so worried about Marianne. He says, is she out of danger? Is she going to die? He's so worried about this and he needs reassuring. He's heard it from the servants, but he needs to hear it from Eleanor. And he's so distressed over this. And you can see, and this is a question that is first presented here, that is, that you kind of come back to multiple times. Is this change in Willoughby, is it because of the consequences he's received, or is it because or is it because he's actually different? Has he actually changed, or is it just his regret, the consequences, the humiliation, the sadness he is experiencing now? Or has he actually had remorse for the things he's done? So he presents the question to her. Do you think me a knave or a fool? Which I think is very interesting because obviously knave is probably more appropriate for Willoughby. I actually had to look this up because I knew a knave was a bad thing, but I hadn't actually looked up the definition, and it's actually a dishonest man. Maybe not. Maybe, can a woman be a knave? Comment down below if you know the answer. But clearly the answer is knave because, he's not a fool. Willoughby is clearly very cunning and very deceitful, and that is also a theme we come to throughout this, this whole thing. And he's drunk. That's the other detail. A pint of porter. I actually had to look this up. I don't know how much alcohol porter has in it, but I learned that a pint is more alcohol than the liver can process. So I don't think that's very important, but I do think it makes Willoughby more honest in this scene. I don't think he's weaving many lies. I believe that this is actually what he believes. She gives him the time of day, and this is a quote, "The steadiness of his manner and the intelligence of his eye as he spoke convinced Eleanor that whatever other unpardonable folly might bring him to Cleveland, he was not brought there by intoxication." But she, still very stern, requires a very particular excuse for him being there. And this is his answer. "I mean," he said with serious energy, "if I can, to make you hate me 1 degree less than you do now. I mean to offer some kind of explanation, some kind of apology for the past, to open my whole heart to you, and by convincing you that though I have always been a blockhead, I have not always been a rascal. To obtain something like forgiveness from your sister." Okay, so we make it to forgiveness. Willoughby is being humble, and I don't think this is a very rare thing for his character. He's not extremely prideful from what I can tell. Most of his motives are from greed and from his want for a higher lifestyle than he can afford and his laziness. But I do believe him coming to Eleanor is amazingly humble. And and here we get the word of the day, the word of this entire passage, this entire chapter, and that would be forgiveness. So forgiveness is the main theme of this. This is Eleanor being asked to forgive Willoughby, who hurt her sister so bad, and she's a saint. She absolutely is, for being able to. And Marianne forgives him because she's Marianne, because she's driven by emotion, because she loves him. And she asks him, she's still skeptical, that's this entire first part. She says, "Is this the real reason in your coming?" And he says, with a warmth, he says, "Upon my soul it is." And the quote is, "With a warmth which brought all the former Willoughby to her remembrance. In spite of herself, in spite of herself, made her think him sincere." And then she tells him that Marianne has long forgiven him. And he says, "Has she?" he cried in the same eager tone. "Then she has forgiven me before she ought to have done it. But she shall forgive me again." Kind of cocky, I know. "And on more reasonable grounds. Now, will you listen to me?" Eleanor bowed her head in assent. So she's allowing him to state his case. She's already done this, but she needed a little bit of persuasion. She's still skeptical, she's still angry, and she has every right to be. He goes on to explain that his motives when he met her family were not anything evil. He hadn't planned this. This wasn't premeditated. He didn't mean to hurt Marianne. He didn't come there thinking, "Oh, why don't I just hurt this girl?" He explains that this was not a scheme. This was just something that happened. And I think that definitely adds to his credibility and Eleanor's perspective, because he, again, sort of discounts himself as a lying, manipulative, just scheming person. Number one, through him being drunk. Number two, through him asking if she thinks him a fool. He constantly is referring to himself as a fool, as someone who is not smart, who hasn't planned this, who wasn't cunning, who just, these things happen to him. In short, and I think this is something I wrote a little bit, I wrote this in the margins, like, he's not a man. He's still a boy. He's still selfish. He still is playing the victim and not owning up to his mistakes. But he is beating himself up about it, and it does regret it, but he's not fixing it. And I think that is the difference between remorse and penance. Remorse is feeling guilty for what you've done. Penance is trying to make up for it. And he's not trying to make up for his mistakes, really. He's just apologizing. And that is the first step. But I definitely think that there is more character development that Willoughby needs before he is truly a man. He can truly be counted as grown up and not a little boy, necessarily. And then he describes how he loves Marianne, and he uses the word insensible, which is not a random word in this story because the name is Sense and Sensibility. Insensible is the antecedent of Eleanor's character. Eleanor is sensible. And Marianne, sensibility actually means more whimsical, driven by emotion. It's not necessarily insensible, but it does put less of a weight on sensibility. And he is describing himself as insensible. He's describing himself as the opposite of Eleanor, just like Marianne is in many ways. It's almost everyone in this story's downfall when they are insensible. But you come to see also that Eleanor's sensibility keeps her back from what she wants and gives her a lot of pain for a very long time. So that's just an interesting thing to note. He says, at first I must confess my vanity was only elevated by it, careless of her happiness. And obviously this makes Eleanor pretty mad. He endeavored by every means in his power to make himself pleasing to her, without any design of returning her affection. And then Miss Dashwood at this point, turning her eyes on him with the most angry contempt, stopped him by saying, "It is hardly worthwhile, Mr. Willoughby, for you to relate or for me to listen any longer. Such beginnings as this cannot be followed by anything. Do not let me be pained by hearing any more on the subject." So she slams him down. She understands. She's like, there's nothing. He cannot redeem himself from this kind of behavior. He was careless with my sister's emotions. He made himself as appealing to her as possible, knowing that he wouldn't marry her. And he explains more how he lives an expensive lifestyle and therefore was not a thing to be thought of, and with meanness, selfishness, cruelty, which no indignant nor contemptuous look, even yours, Miss Dashwood, can ever reprobate too much, as acting in a manner trying to engage her regard without a thought of returning it. But one thing may be said for me, even in that horrid state of selfish vanity. I did not know the extent of the injury. I meditated because I did not then know what it was to love. But have I ever known it? And I'm going to read more of that quote because this part is really solid. But he definitely shows this awareness of his past misdeeds, but a blindness to his current misdeeds. This is a cycle with Willoughby, and you wonder if he ever actually changes or if he just is able to identify that bad, that good. And I think that's just a really interesting thing about his character. He has this cycle of he has this cycle of acting like the victim. Okay, so now comes the whopping quote. I love this one. It's so telling to the audience, to Eleanor, to just about Willoughby and his self-awareness, but also his refusal to change. And also, but this gives you so much empathy for him, so much understanding, makes you really feel sorry for him. And it's so good. So here we go. To avoid a comparative poverty, which her affection and her society would have deprived of all its horrors, I have, by raising myself to affluence, lost everything that could have made it a blessing. And Eleanor, obviously, she's softened by this. She says, you actually felt affection towards her. And he said, of course I did. And he says he was planning on proposing to her. But of course, here's where we get the first hints of his victim complex, I guess you could say. He says, then a circumstance occurred, an unlucky circumstance, to ruin all my resolution. Miss Smith finds out, and you can see he's ashamed of what he did to that poor girl, but you also see that he more so wishes that it wouldn't have gotten in the way of his life with Marianne than he wishes he hadn't done it in the first place. So there's definitely a thing there, but he does feel embarrassed by it. And Eleanor, being reminded of this, is angry. She hardens her heart anew against any compassion for him. And she says, I've heard it all. And how will you explain this away? How are you gonna talk? How are you gonna sit there and tell me you think what you did to that girl, that innocent 15-year-old girl? If you guys don't know the context, basically this girl is pregnant by him, and he kind of just left. She didn't know where he was. She was left alone. This is Colonel Brandon's ward, I guess you could say. And that's why the tensions, if you didn't know the context, that's what he did. But she doesn't understand how he can be redeemable from this. Again, we're going in circles to where she doesn't know how this is excusable. She says, go ahead, try. And then Willoughby, he's like, hey, Colonel Brandon is really biased against me. And then he notes something, and I think Jane Austen uses Willoughby to note something about society in general and their views on women and their role in this sort of thing. But it says, I do not mean to justify myself, but at the same time, it cannot leave you to suppose that I have nothing to urge, that because she was injured, she was irreproachable. I'm sorry. That because she was injured, she was irreproachable. And because I was a libertine, she must be a saint. If the violence of her passions, the weakness of her understanding, I do not mean, however, to defend myself, her affection for me deserved better treatment. And, of course, he wishes it never had been, but again, you ask the question, why does he regret it? Because of remorse or because of the consequences he has faced because of his actions? And I don't know if this is really answered in this passage, but it is an interesting thing to keep in mind. And Eleanor, she's not having it. She understands where he's coming from, but she says, your indifference is no apology for your cruel neglect of her. Do you think yourself excused by any weakness, any natural defect of understanding on her side, and the wanton cruelty so evident in yours? And Willoughby, he says he didn't know that she didn't know where he'd gone. He simply neglected to leave his address. Which, I mean, the audience and Eleanor believes him on, because he's drunk. He's not going to be very good at lying at this point. But he's, again, with that warm reply where he's like, oh, of course, I can explain this away. Almost this unknowingness of the gravity of what he's done in his situation. And obviously, and then we bring it back to what Miss Smith said. And she's obviously mad, and she says, she gives him an ultimatum, all that stuff, and he's gonna lose the fortune, his inheritance, if he doesn't marry the girl. So, and here we get such a disappointing quote. Again, with this victim complex he has, he says, in the height of her morality, good woman, she offered to forgive the past if I would marry Eliza. That could not be. Why not? He doesn't explain. He just says, it can't be. I couldn't do that. That just couldn't happen. But he doesn't acknowledge that he could have done anything to mold these circumstances differently. Obviously, he admits what he did to Marianne was wrong, but when it comes to other people, when it comes to other situations, he's acting like he was a backseat driver in all of this. And he's dismissed from her favor. Okay. He said, the struggle was great, but it ended too soon. My affection for Marianne, my thorough conviction of her attachment to me, it was all insufficient to outweigh the dread of poverty and to get the better of those false ideas of the necessity of riches, which I was naturally inclined to feel. So again, there are countless examples of him playing the victim. And then he describes how he leaves her, and Eleanor is mad again. In fact, she is reproachful, which is so strange for Eleanor. She's not, this is a rare emotion for her, but oh my goodness. Hearing about him leaving her sister makes her so bad, and just all this recalling of Marianne's pain. I'm skipping a lot because this video would run super long if I analyzed every bit of this, but here we go. This is a big part of describing his remorse yet again. I was miserable, Miss Dashwood. You cannot have an idea of the comfort it gives me to look back on my own misery. I owe such a grudge to myself for the stupid, rascally folly of my own heart, that all my past sufferings under it are only one triumph and exaltation to me now. Well, I went and left all that I loved, and went to those whom, at best, I was only indifferent.
And Eleanor pities him, but is still anxious for his departure. She doesn't want a conflict between him and Colonel Brandon. She is non-confrontational. That's a big part of Eleanor. But she asks if that's all, and we go on to the letter, and he explains the contents of Marianne's letter to him, and how his heart reacted, and in all these colorful words that we know, Marianne and Willoughby love just comparing and all the poetry, and here we go, after he described that.
Eleanor's heart, which had undergone many changes in the course of this extraordinary conversation, was now softened again. Yet she felt it was her duty to check such ideas in her companion at last.
So she obviously reminds him that he's married, and the letter awakens his remorse, and he explains how he had felt about Marianne when he felt he could forget her. And just all this background knowledge of London, and then we have this completely audacious passage. It's just unbelievable.
If you can pity me, Miss Dashwood, pity my situation as it was then. With my head and heart full of your sister, I was forced, mind you, to play happy lover to another woman. This man. And again, we go, and she reaches this point where she's actually asking him to describe more after he's kind of wrapped things up. The letter he wrote to her, how his fiance wrote it, and now we're gonna get into the meat of, no, there's a lot of meat to this, but this page is pretty good. He describes, again, in this colorful language, his love for Marianne, and Eleanor calls him out on all this victimhood and all this feeling sorry for himself that he's done. And she says, "You are very wrong, Mr. Willoughby, very blamable," while her voice, in spite of herself, betrayed her compassionate emotion. "You ought not to speak in this way, either of Mrs. Willoughby or my sister. You have made your choice. It was not forced on you. Your wife has claim to your politeness, to your respect at least. To treat her with unkindness, to speak of her slightingly, is no atonement to Marianne, nor can I suppose it is a relief to your own conscience." So, oh my goodness, I love that Eleanor is calling out his attitude in this scene. But Eleanor still claims the position of mediator between Willoughby and Marianne. She knows Marianne will go with whatever whim she desires and fancy, and she knows that telling her that Willoughby still loves her will not profit. I actually don't know if she says anything about it, but she'll tell her whatever is necessary. And I think that's a really boss power move. And I'm going to try to wrap this up pretty quickly because this video is so long. And if you are still here, wow, thank you. You must really love Sense and Sensibility. But, okay. So, I did want to note quickly on Sir John. Willoughby says, "His heart was softened in seeing mine suffer, and so much of his ill will was done away, that when we parted he almost shook me by the hand while he was reminding me of an old promise about a pointier pupper. Oh my goodness, it's been a long day. A pointer puppy." Okay, so this is a good example of how forgiveness is a lot easier for those who have been barely wronged. We see Eleanor suffering through it a lot more than Sir John, and it also says a lot about Sir John's attachment to their family. Now, Sir John seems like a nice fellow and all, but he certainly gets over Willoughby's evil a lot easier than Eleanor would. So now he knows all, and here we are at my favorite. This kind of sums up the entire argument, the entire thought process of Eleanor at this point. Okay, so I'm going to start here. Idleness, dissipation, luxury had made the mind, the character, the happiness of a man who in every advantage of person and talents united a disposition naturally open and honest, and a feeling affectionate temper. And here's the big one. The world had made him extravagant and vain. Extravagance and vanity had made him cold-hearted and selfish. Vanity, while seeking its own guilty triumph at the expense of another, had involved him to a real attachment, which extravagance, or at least its offspring, necessity, had required to be sacrificed. Each faulty propensity in leading him to evil had led him likewise to punishment. Again, with a beautiful argument of evil will find itself out, or sin will find you out. Willoughby's bad actions, his extravagance, his vanity, the small step stools in his path to destruction, to unhappiness, each led him to punishment, and it shows that no small choice is insignificant. The moment you begin down this path, the moment you're extravagant, you're vain, those lead you down a path. And whether you agree with that or not, I think it's a beautiful look into Austen's view on the matter. And now we come to Eleanor's finale. He held out his hand. She could not refuse him hers. And he pressed it with affection. This is where she's able to forgive him, where she's able to not excuse him, but to forgive him and to accept his apology. And here's this beautiful thing. I love this so much. Eleanor assured him that she did think better of him, that she forgave, pitied, and wished him well, and was even interested in his happiness, and added some gentle counsel as to the behavior most likely to promote it. His answer was not very encouraging. Again, we see Willoughby again entering into the cycle of just unawareness of his own role in his demise. He may be aware later, but in the moment he takes very little action to prevent further pain. And it's this beautiful ending. You're very wrong. She can never be more lost to you than she is now. And he said she won't be forever. So we can see this maturity in Willoughby. Okay, so I know I read a lot more of that than I intended to. I absolutely adore that scene. It is one of my favorite scenes in all of literature. This video was extremely long because I love that scene so much. But if I had to say anything about Austen's thesis of that passage, it was most definitely on the topic of forgiveness and how, okay, Eleanor is absolutely a saint, and seeing her forgiving Willoughby is amazing and incredible and adds so much depth to her character. But also we get to see different snapshots into how people forgive or don't forgive Willoughby. Colonel Brandon does not forgive Willoughby, and some would say he shouldn't. I would say Austen definitely views it as very important in character, and just seeing how Eleanor's respect and her general posture led her to empathy for a person who had hurt her sister so badly, and how her empathy led her to forgiveness and led her to be able to forget about Willoughby. Forgiveness allows you freedom, and I think it's such a beautiful example of that. I love Eleanor. She's one of my favorite Austen characters, and I'm so happy to be able to have deep dove into this whole thing. I know this was long. If you're still here, I love you, and you must be a huge Jane Austen fan. I really had so much fun analyzing this. It was hard, but it was one of my favorite things to do, just deep diving into this. Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments below. I really enjoyed doing this. Please like this video and subscribe if you haven't already for more content like this. And I will see you guys next Saturday. Bye!